Namaskaram. Today I'm going to be talking about the second Mangalam verse of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. As with all of Bhagavan's verses, in order to understand not just the surface meaning of the verse, but the implication of the verse, we need to see it in the context of his entire teachings, most specifically in the context of this work, Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, because it's when we view his teaching, each verse or each passage of his teachings in the context of the whole teachings, but we can understand so much more of what is the implication in it. So I will start by talking a little bit about the context of this verse. It was not, that is, Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu was written by Bhagavan at Murugan's request. What Murugan requested was, Meyin ilbum adu mevam tiranum, emku odaha, ulahu wihambadi emku odaha. I think we say now, just get the exact wording. Meyin ilbum adu mevam tiranum, emku wiyampadi Murugan oduka inna. That is, when Murugan prayed or requested Bhagavan, revealed to us the nature of reality and the means of attaining it, so that we may be saved. And so that is the context in which Bhagavan wrote Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. So originally there were some miscellaneous verses that Murugan had gathered together, and these were the basis of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. But later on, most of the original verses were removed. In the end, only 2 or 3 of the original verses were retained, and even those were slightly modified. So Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu was written at the request of Murugan, and the specific request was to reveal the nature of reality and the means of attaining it. Bhagavan actually says relatively little about the nature of reality in this, in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu and in other works. Of course, he gives us indications, but the nature of reality really can't be revealed through words. The nature of reality, what is real, is silence. That is the pure awareness that is always shining in our heart as eye. That is silence. That is the reality. And that can be revealed only by itself. That is, it can be revealed only by silence in silence, because it is silence. So Bhagavan's teachings in words are showing us the way. That is, ademevam tiranam, the means to attain it, because only we can know it only by direct experience. So Bhagavan's focus of Bhagavan's teachings is on practice. What is the means by which we can know what we actually are? Bhagavan's original plan, that the original Mangalam verse was just 2 lines. It was a Kurulvemba. That is what the last 2 lines of the present first Mangalam verse. So this is setting the context for the whole work. What he said in the original version, the 2-line version of this verse was Ullaporul Uλλļadu. That's a question. Ullaporul means the existing substance or reality, what actually exists. Uλλļadu, who can or how to, Ullal means thinking. It implies meditation. Who can or how to meditate on the existing reality? Ullal, the basic meaning of Ullal is thinking. So in this context, it means meditating. It also means investigating. So the implication is how to meditate on it, how to investigate and know it. And Bhagavan gave a very simple answer. That he asked the question, he gave the answer. Ullate, ullapadi, ullade, ullal. that is ulla, that investigating or thinking of reality. What is it? Ullate, in the heart, uλλļadu, as it is, uλλļade. Being as it is in the heart is meditating on it. So this is in these two lines, Bhagavan is summarizing the whole essence of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. All the rest of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is just a clarification of what is meant by being in the heart as it is. After Bhagavan had completed Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, or Bhagavan and Murugan thought it had been completed, some devotees informed Kavyaganta about this. Kavyaganta, he was a great poet and scholar in Sanskrit. His mother tongue was Telugu. He could speak and read Tamil, but he had very little knowledge of literary Tamil, so he couldn't really understand literary Tamil, but he did understand spoken Tamil. He could also read the script. So when he was shown the work, the first thing he did when he glanced through it, he noticed that the maṅgalam verse was 2 lines and all the other verses were 4 lines. So that seemed to him to be not quite right. So he said, why is this first verse in a different meter and all the other verses are in a different meter? And then Bhagavan explained to him that this is a Kural Vemba. It's a 2-line form of a Vemba, and all the others are 4-line Vembas. So they're actually in the same meter. But he said, wouldn't it be better to have it 4 lines like all the other verses? So then Bhagavan wrote the first 2 lines. But in the first 2 lines, he clarified the significance of the question that he was asking. That is, the question he asked in the verse was, Uḻḷadu, who can or how to meditate on the existing reality, on the existing substance, the real substance. So to clarify this, he started off with the verse with another question. But this is a rhetorical question. Uḻḷadu, Uḻḷadu, sorry, I read that wrongly. Uڵḷadu, Uڵḷadu, there are various ways this can be interpreted. The basic meaning is, if what exists were not, would existing awareness exist? Other interpretations can also mean, except as what exists, does existing awareness exist? So it's pointing out that awareness and firstly, the very fact that the first meaning, if what exists were not, would existing awareness exist? How do we know that anything exists at all? Because we are aware. If we weren't aware, there's no reason to suppose anything exists, but we are not aware of. So awareness is the basis of our knowledge that something exists. So the very fact that we are aware shows that something does exist, because if nothing actually existed, there couldn't be any awareness. That's one meaning. Another meaning is, except as Uڵḷadu. Does Uڵḷadu exist? That is, except that what this implies is, can the existing awareness be anything other than what exists? So in other words, what actually exists is awareness. Then awareness and existence are not 2 different things. They're one and the same thing. Another meaning that we can derive from this is Ulla. The main meaning of the principal meaning in this context of Uڵḷadu is the existing awareness. We can also take it as it's implying satchit, the real awareness, the awareness that actually exists, or awareness of existence. It doesn't actually mean awareness of existence, but we can take it as implying that. So Ulla there is related to the verb ul, which means to be. There's also another verb, uḻḷu, which means to think. But infinitive form of uḷḷu is ulla. So we can take ulla here to mean to think. So another meaning of this is, other than uḷḷadu, is there an awareness to think of it? In other words, is there an awareness to meditate on it or to investigate it? This is an appropriate, though this isn't the main meaning, it's also an appropriate meaning in the context of what he says later on in the last two lines of the verse. Then, after asking that rhetorical question, he says, since the existing substance exists in the heart without thought, how to think of the existing substance, which is called the heart, heart. So that what he referred to in the original question, uḷḷadu, he tells us more about it. That uḷḷadu, it exists in the heart, and it's also what is called heart. So it exists in the heart as the heart. The heart means the very center of our being. What exists in the very center of our being, and what is the very center of our being, is this existing substance, and it exists without thought. So since without thought means it is beyond it's beyond the reach of thought. Thought is outwardly directed. This is what is in the very depth and the very core of our being, in the very heart of our self. So in the very heart, there are no thoughts. It's only when our attention looks outwards. The outward movement of our attention is thought. So how to think of that which is without thought? The only way to think of it is to be as it is. So this is the meaning of the first verse. So this is what Bhagavan says in this first maṅgalam verse. This is the very heart of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. All the other 40 verses are a commentary on it. So this was originally the maṅgalam verse. Then Kavyaganta raised another objection. He said, this doesn't seem to me an appropriate maṅgalam verse, because a maṅgalam verse should always be a prayer to God, or related to a praise of God, or be a meditation on God. This doesn't mention any name of God at all. Of course, what actually exists is the very reality of God. God is nothing other than uḷḷadu. He's nothing other than uḷḷadu. He is the uḷḷadu. But Kavyaganta wasn't viewing it in that way. So he looked through the rest of the work, and though he couldn't understand the verses in depth, he was noticing none of these seemed to mention any name of God, until finally near the end he found one verse that had the word mahēśaṉ. Mahēśaṉ means the great Lord, and is particularly a name of Lord Shiva. So when he saw this verse, he said, this would be a more appropriate verse to have as a maṅgalam. Why don't you take this verse as the maṅgalam instead of that verse? That was his proposal. Bhagavan knew very well, Bhagavan and Murugan both knew very well why Bhagavan had written that first maṅgalam verse, which is particularly appropriate to this work, Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, because this isn't a work about any name or form of God. This is a work about uḷḷadu, what actually exists, about the very reality of world, soul, and God, that which lies behind the appearance of all this multiplicity. So that had to be the maṅgalam verse. But since Kavyaganta suggested this would be an appropriate maṅgalam verse, Murugan and Bhagavan and Murugan discussed, and then they decided, yes, the first maṅgalam verse is describing the path of that is explicitly describing the path of Atma-vichara, whereas this second verse is implicitly describing the path of surrender. Of course, the path of we cannot surrender ourselves entirely without self-investigation. So ultimately, self-investigation and self-surrender are one and the same path. But Bhagavan often used to say, either investigate yourself or surrender yourself completely. He sometimes used to present them as if they were two alternative paths, knowing that in fact, if you follow we cannot even begin to follow the practice of self-investigation without thereby surrendering ourselves. To the extent to which we attend to ourselves, we are thereby surrendering ourselves. We can begin on the path of surrender even before coming to the path of Atma-vichara, because surrender begins in the Bhakti Marga, when we take God to be something other than ourselves, when we still at the stage of Anya Bhava, we can begin to surrender ourselves to God. And what stands between us and God? Our will. That is, we got so many likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, and so on. So long as we have all these, we cannot give ourselves wholly to God. So surrender begins with trying to surrender our will to the will of God. But obviously, so long as we rise as ego, so long as we remain as a separate individual, we cannot be totally free of likes and dislikes. It's the very nature of ego to have Vishaya vasanas, and Vishaya vasanas are the seeds that give rise to likes and dislikes. So we cannot surrender our will entirely without surrendering ourselves. So how do we surrender ourself? Ourself here means ego. The only way to surrender ego is to investigate it to reality. So ultimately, our surrender cannot become complete without self-investigation. So ultimately, self-investigation and self-surrender are one and the same path. But because Bhagavan acknowledged that surrender could begin even before we begin to investigate ourselves, though it cannot be completed without self-investigation, it can begin before self-investigation. He often used to say, either investigate yourself or surrender yourself. So it was Bhagavan and Murugan decided it would be appropriate to have this as a second Mangalam verse. So they made this the second Mangalam verse, and Bhagavan composed another verse. I think it was one of the verses towards the end to take its place. So that this is how this came to be a Mangalam verse. It wasn't originally intended to be a Mangalam verse, but for this reason it became a Mangalam verse. Why this is important? We need to, in order to put this in context and understand it in context. That is very important. It's important to understand this. What Bhagavan is talking about throughout Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, he's pointing out just one path. He's not pointing out two paths, he's pointing out one path. And as he said in the first Mangalam verse, how are we to meditate on or to know that existing reality, the Uḻḷapadu, the Uḷḷadu, what actually exists? We can meditate on it, investigate it, or know it only by being in the heart as it is. As it is means, since it is the heart and it is beyond thought, being in the heart as it is means being without thought. Thought is nothing but the outward flow of our attention. When our attention is directed outwards, we call that thought. In order to be as we actually are, what we actually are is devoid of thought. In other words, it's just pure awareness. So in order to be as we actually are, we need to know ourselves as we actually are. To know ourselves as we actually are means we need to know ourselves as pure awareness. So long as we're aware of anything other than ourselves, we are not experiencing ourselves as pure awareness. We're experiencing ourselves as ego. So in order to experience ourselves as the pure awareness that we actually are, we need to attend only to ourselves. So the whole of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is directing our attention back to ourselves. So this second Mangalam verse is no exception to this. In fact, the whole thrust of all of Bhagavan's teachings, the ultimate aim of all of Bhagavan's teachings is to direct our attention back to ourselves. That is the Bhagavan has revealed. This is the whole purpose of the entire Vedanta, is nothing but to direct our attention back to ourselves. That is, Vedanta is summarized in the 4 Mahavakyas. And what are these 4 Mahavakyas doing? They're directing our attention back to ourselves. Till now, we've been looking for God outside. We've been looking for the truth outside. We've been looking for happiness outside. We've been looking for knowledge outside. But what do the Vedas say? Tattvamasi, you are that. So what's the practical implication of such Mahavakyas? Till now, we've been looking for that outside ourselves. When the Vedas say you are that, their intention is to turn our attention back to ourselves. So the whole purpose of all of Vedanta is to turn our attention back to ourselves. And this is what Bhagavan has highlighted in his teachings. So this verse is no exception. If we understand this, then the inner meaning of this verse becomes much clearer. That is, one more point I'll say about this verse before going through the meaning. This verse is in a sense autobiographical. Bhagavan begins by referring to those who have intense fear of death. As we all know, that intense fear of death was the trigger that turned Bhagavan's mind, not Bhagavan's mind, because Bhagavan had no mind, prompted that ego that was aware of itself as I am Venkataraman, prompted it to turn within to investigate who am I, and thereby to merge back forever in its source, upon which Bhagavan shone forth through that body that was previously Venkataraman was the Uḻḷadu itself, namely Bhagavan Ramana. So this verse, Bhagavan is in a way referring to his own experience. So after that little preamble, I'll now come to the actual meaning of the verse. What Bhagavan says in this verse is, maraṇabhaya mikkuḷavam makkaḷ, araṇ-āha maraṇabhava-millā mahēśaṉ caraṇamē sāvā. Tam sārvodu, tam cārvuṭṛār. Sārvu enum sārvarō sārvar. What that means is, there's three sentences. The first sentence is, maraṇa mikkuḻavam. That's the subject. Makkaḻ means people. Makkaḻ, superficially we can take it to mean those people, but actually it has a deeper meaning, because though is a demonstrative prefix, here it's not that isn't intended to be that demonstrative prefix. The word means beautiful. In what is the beauty Bhagavan is referring to here? It's the beauty of a pure heart. So makkaḻ, beautiful people, refers to those who are pure of heart. So pure-hearted people. We can take here, though it literally means beautiful, we can take it to mean pure-hearted. So pure-hearted people. And what does he say about those pure-hearted people? Maraṇabhayam mikkuḷavam. Maraṇabhayam, marana is death, bhayam is fear. So maraṇabhayam is fear of death. Mikku means very excessive or very intense. Ulla means who have. So pure-hearted people who have intense fear of death. This is the subject of the sentence. What will such pure-hearted people do? araṇ-āha maraṇabhava-millā mahēśaṉ sārnamē sāvā. araṇ-āha means as a refuge. Oh, sorry, as a fortress. Araṇ means a fortress. Maraṇabhava-millā mahēśaṉ means the great Lord who is devoid of birth and death. Who is devoid of birth and death? If God were something other than ourselves, whatever is other than ourselves seems to exist only in the view of ego. So the God who seems to be other than ourselves comes into existence only when ego comes into existence, and ceases to exist when ego ceases to exist. As Bhagavan says in the 7th paragraph of ṇāha, yathārthamai uḷḷadu atma-sarūpamandre. What actually exists is only atma-sarūpa. God, world, and soul are just appearances in it, like the illusory silver in a shell, in the mother of pearl in a shell. They appear to get, they appear simultaneously and may disappear simultaneously. So the mahēśaṉ Bhagavan is talking about here is not God who seems to be something other than ourselves, because God who seems to be something other than ourselves comes into existence when we rise as ego and ceases to exist when we subside back in our source. In sleep, what shines in sleep is only I am, nothing other than I am. So the real God is not the God who seems to be separate from ourselves. The real mahēśaṉ is that which is always shining in our heart as I. Because only that which is, what is maraṇa-bhavam-illā, what is devoid of birth and death, is only that fundamental awareness, I am. This is what Bhagavan referred to in the previous verse as Uḻḷadu and as Uḻḷadu. What actually exists and the existing substance. And that what is the nature of that existing substance? It is Uڵḷadu. It's the real awareness, the pure awareness I am. So that which appears and disappears cannot be real. Only that which is never appears and never disappears. In other words, that which is without birth and without death, that alone is real. So mahēśaṉ, what Bhagavan implies here by mahēśaṉ, when he says maraṇabhava-illā mahēśaṉ, he's referring to that fundamental awareness I am, which alone is what actually exists. That alone is Atma-swarupa, and as Bhagavan said, what actually exists is only Atma-swarupa. So mahēśaṉ is that which shines in our heart as I. So what are his feet? Obviously his feet are not something other than him. So here, what is metaphorically described as the feet of mahēśaṉ is likewise what shines in our heart as I. So, and the final verb, sārvar, means to take refuge. So, what does Bhagavan mean by taking refuge in the feet of mahēśaṉ? He means nothing but taking refuge in our own heart. So what he described in the previous verse as ullapadi, ullate, ullapadi, ullade, being in the heart as it is what he describes here as maraṇabhava-millā mahēśaṉ, cārvoḍutāñ sāvā, taking refuge in his feet. The verb sā is a very appropriate verb in this context. Sāvā means to reach, or to approach, or to reach. So we in order to take refuge in his feet, we have to approach him. When you go to someone for refuge, you approach them with all humility, and you subside and you take refuge at their feet. That is the implication here. So we're approaching and reaching the heart, which is the place of refuge. That is the fortress in which the heart alone is the fortress in which we can take refuge. And the heart, of course, is itself mahēśaṉ, that maraṇabhava-millā mahēśaṉ. That is, the verb sā also means to depend upon or take shelter in. In other words, take refuge in. Uڵḷadu means to take refuge. Sā also means to be near, to come close. It means to be associated or connected with. It means to unite. And it also means to lean upon and depend upon. So it's got various meanings, but what all these meanings imply is taking refuge. And in this context, taking refuge means, how can we take refuge in the feet of God? Only by surrendering ourselves entirely to him. If you are in danger, supposing there are some very bad people who are chasing and want to kill you, and you go to a strong person for refuge, what do? You surrender yourself to him. You take refuge in his feet. So the implication in this context, the implication of sāvā, though it means to approach, come close, unite with, take refuge in, it implies surrender. We have to surrender ourselves to the feet of God. How do we surrender ourselves to the feet of God? Since the feet of God are that which is always shining in our heart as I, clinging to those feet, adhering to those feet. That's another meaning of sāvā. Holding on, coming close, uniting, binding ourselves to his feet. So we must be wholly attached to his feet. We must turn our entire attention within and firmly hold his feet in our heart. Holding his feet in our heart means holding on to that, to his reality, that fundamental awareness I am. So, though this first sentence, though it's expressed in the language of bhakti, this is the pure, what Bhagavan is actually indicating here is the purest jnana. It's exactly what Bhagavan is saying in this sentence is exactly the same that he said in the main sentence of the previous verse. Uḻḷate, Uḻḷapadi, Uḻḷade, Ullal. That is being in the heart as it is meditating on that, on it, or investigating it. So, in order to surrender ourselves wholly to God, we need to turn our entire attention back within. We need to take a refuge in him. Once we've taken refuge in him, what is our state? Uḻḷate, Uḻḷapadi, Ullade, just being in the heart as it is. That is taking refuge. We cannot be in the heart as it is without giving ourselves entirely to him. So long as we remain as a separate entity, we are not being in the heart as it is. So the being in the heart as it is implies the complete subsidence, the complete dissolution of ego. Likewise, maraṇabhava-millā mahēśaṉ, sārnamē sāvā implies the complete subsidence of ego. So what Bhagavan is saying in this verse is exactly the same that he was saying in the previous verse. He's just saying it in a different, he's in a different type of, in different wording, using different metaphors to try and express the truth. That is, the truth is, as he said in the previous verse, it is beyond thought, so it cannot be adequately expressed in words. So whatever words are used by Bhagavan are metaphors. Those metaphors are pointing us in the right direction. So the direction in which they're pointing us is back into the heart, because the heart alone is real. The heart means the very center of everything. What is the center of everything? That fundamental awareness, I am. That is the heart. That is maraṇabhava-millā mahēśaṉ. That is the feet of maraṇabhava-millā mahēśaṉ. So Bhagavan is talking, what Bhagavan is saying in this verse is exactly the same that he was saying in the previous verse, and indeed in all the verses in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. The whole of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu is pointing only at this, turning our entire attention within, taking refuge in the heart, remain just being as we actually are in the heart. That is what Bhagavan, the whole of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu is about. That is what all of Bhagavan's teachings are about. And if we understand it correctly, that is what the whole of Vedanta is about. That is why Bhagavan came. Why was it necessary for Bhagavan to, when the Vedanta is already there are so many Upanishads, there's the Brahma Sutra, there's the Bhagavad Gita, there are so many commentaries on them. All this vast literature is there. What was the necessity of that maraṇabhava-millā mahēśaṉ, Lord Arunachala Shiva himself, to take human form as Bhagavan Ramana in order to give us this teaching? The reason he took form, this human form, is to reveal to us what is the practical implication of the entire Vedanta. And the practical implication of the entire Vedanta is that we turn within and take refuge at the feet of the Supreme Lord, who is always shining in our heart as I. So this verse is talking about the very heart of Bhagavan's teaching. So actually, if we understand it correctly, this is a very appropriate maṅgalam verse, not because it happens to mention mahēśaṉ, which is the name of Lord Shiva. That is incidental. It It is the heart of Bhagavan's teachings, because it's talking about exactly what he was talking about in the previous verse, which is being in the heart as it is. That is how to be in the heart. We obviously have to go in, we obviously have to return, we have to approach within, we have to reach the very depth of our heart. Then only we can be in the heart as it is. So what Bhagavan described in the previous verse, that is our aim, to be in the heart as it is. How do we achieve that? By taking refuge in him, by turning within, and with heart melting with love, we need to reach his abode. As he says in Ariyati Tarajivara Dahabari Jagohayil, Arivairami Paramatman Arunachala Ramanan, what he says in the second half of that verse, that is the first half of the verse this is the verse Bhagavan wrote when he was asked who he is, which of the gods. Is he Subramanya or Shiva or this god or that god? His reply was, Ariyati Tarajivara Dahabari Jagohayil Arivairami Paramatuman Arunachala Ramanan. That is, Arunachala Ramanan is that Paramatma that blissfully exists and shines as awareness in the cave, in the cave of the heart lotus of all the different jivas, beginning with Hari. So Bhagavan is not the incarnation of any particular god. He is that which is shining in the heart of all gods, beginning from Hari. Not only all gods, all jivas, all living beings, all sentient beings, in the heart of every one of them, that which is shining as awareness. Which awareness is that? That is the fundamental awareness I am. So I am is Bhagavan, that which is shining in our heart as that Paramatma, which is always shining in our heart as that fundamental awareness I am, that is Arunachala Ramanan. And how do we know, how can we know him? How can we reach him? That is what he explains in the second half of this verse. Parivalulam uruha, heart melting with love. Nalparan andidu guhayandu, reaching the cave where that Nalparan, that gracious, that it literally means the Nala literally means good, but here it means the that is good in the very superlative sense of the word, that which is excellent, that which is the very best of all. So that supreme, which is that ever gracious supreme, we need to, in order to reach him, we need to enter the heart where he where he resides, and by entering the heart, the eye of awareness, arivam viri tirava, the eye of awareness opening, nijam arivai, you will know. Nijam means what is natural, what is innate. In other words, nijam here refers to our real nature, what we actually are, the ultimate truth, the ultimate reality. We will know that. Aduveliyam, it will literally, aduveliyam means it will come out. That means it will reveal itself. So what is, in order to be in the heart as it is, we need to, with our whole heart melting with love, we need to turn our entire attention within. So that is what Bhagavan describes here as maraṇabhava-millā, mahēśaṉ, sārnamē, sāvā. We need to take refuge in him with our heart melting with love. Our whole attention has to turn within, and we have to sink into the very depth of our heart. Then only we can truly take refuge in him, because the only fortress that will protect us from all the perils of samsara is our own heart, that which is shining in our heart as I. That is, that fundamental awareness I am is shining in the heart as the heart. That itself is the heart. That itself is Arunachala. That itself is Bhagavan. That itself is maraṇabhava-millā mahēśaṉ. So when when we consider this verse in the context of all of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu and in the context of all of Bhagavan's teachings, we can see so much more meaning than appears when we just superficially read the meaning of the words. The meaning of the words are very simple. Pure-hearted people who have intense fear of death take refuge at the feet of God, who is devoid of birth and death, as a fortress. That is, they take refuge in his feet as a fortress. That's very, very simple, the meaning. But how much depth of implication lies in these very simple words? So this is the main sentence, the first sentence and the main sentence of this verse. Then in the next sentence, what is the result? If we take refuge at his feet, what is the result? He is what he implies in the next sentence. Tam sārvodu. That means by their sārvu. Sārvu, it's a verb, it's a noun derived from the verb sār, which means to take refuge. So in this context, sārvu means refuge. So tam sārvodu implies by their taking refuge. In other words, by their surrender, tam cārvoḍutāñ, they achieve death, that is, they die. By surrendering ourselves, what is the benefit we get by surrendering ourselves wholly to Bhagavan? We die. That is, the death referred to here is not the death of the body, it's the death of ego. Let the body live or die is no concern of ours, because we are not this body. What needs to die is this false awareness, I am this body. That is ego. So Bhagavan's teachings are all about death of ego. Araṇ-āha mena ahamene paba ahatebe rarupaya araṇ-āha. Araṇ-āha, you eradicate, you root out the ego of those who meditate on you in the heart as I. So that is what Bhagavan's teachings are all about. And in another verse in Akramlai, Bhagavan says, "Kodi tadeyere kollu ne katti kondeng barbe araṇ-āha." That is, he uses a beautiful analogy there. Kodi tadeyere kollu ne katti. That is, hoisting your flag to announce yourself as the killer of your devotees. That is, in old days, if a rich person was to do some philanthropy, to feed poor people or whatever, to do some philanthropy, they would hoist a flag to announce on such and such a day, I'm going to feed all poor people. So seeing the hoisted flag, all poor people will come there and eat. So Araṇ-āha has hoisted a flag to announce his philanthropy. What is the philanthropy done by Araṇ-āha? It is he's hoisted his flag to announce a great philanthropy I will do. I will kill my devotees. That is, if we go to him for refuge, if we take refuge in him, what will he do? He will kill us. By killing us, that is truly giving us refuge, because so long as we rise as ego, we are in mortal danger in this great ocean of samsara, this endless cycle of birth and death. We're literally in mortal danger, because if we're born, we're surely going to die. And if we die, we're surely going to be born again, so long as we take ourselves to be this body. So the death that will put an end to all death is the death of ego. So by turning within and taking refuge in the heart, he will kill us. That we will achieve death. And what is the benefit of all of Bhagavan's teachings? It is the death of ego. This is what his teachings are all about. This is why in the very last verse of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, he defines what is mukti, what is liberation. That is in the dharmic religions, in the large family of religions called Sanatana Dharma, which includes Jainism, Buddhism, Sikhism, Hinduism, the whole family. The one thing, the ultimate aim that we're all seeking is moksha. But there are so many different ideas people have of moksha. What is moksha? Moksha means freedom from samsara. Now, the problem that has been identified by all great sages of all these religions is samsara, this cycle of birth and death. So liberation from this cycle of birth and death, that is our aim. But there are so many different conceptions people have of what is liberation from birth and death. Some people think if you go to Vaikuntha and live eternally with Vishnu, that is escaping samsara. Others think if you go to Shivaloka and reside with Lord Shiva, that is escaping samsara. So many different conceptions people have of moksha. Some people think moksha, you retain your individuality. So that is liberation with form. Some people think that in liberation, you lose your individuality. That is liberation without form. Some people believe that if you're liberated, you're free to either be with form or without form. So all the various conceptions that people have of liberation can be summarized in the three categories: liberation with form, liberation without form, or liberation with or without form. So Bhagavan says, if it is asked whether the liberation one attains is with form, without form, or without form, I will say, liberation is the death of the ego form, of the destruction of the ego form, but distinguishes these different types of liberation, with form, without form, with or without form. So the whole aim of Bhagavan's teachings is destruction of ego. That is what Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is all about. That is what all of Bhagavan's teachings are about. That is what the whole of Vedanta is about, if we understand it correctly. As Bhagavan says in the I think if I remember correctly, in the final verse of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu Anubandham, Akila Vedanta Siddhanta Sārate ṇāha aham unmayāha urevam. I will truly say what is the essence of the Siddhanta, the final conclusion of all of Vedanta. Then what is the conclusion? Aham setu, I dying, aham aduvahi, if I dying, if I becomes that, that means Brahman. Arivuruvam aham ade micham ari. Know that only that I, which is of a form of awareness, will remain. So the whole aim of the entire Vedanta is nothing but the death of ego, because when ego dies, we remain as that pure awareness. So this is why do we investigate ourselves? Why do we surrender ourselves? What is the goal which we are seeking? We are seeking our own death, our own destruction. So this is the fruit of surrender. We take refuge in the feet of God so that God may kill us. Because only when he has killed us, then we are eternally safe, because then only are we really being in the heart as it is. Uḷḷate, uḷḷapadi, uḷḷade. That is, we cannot be in the heart as it is so long as we rise as ego. So we cease rising as ego every day when we fall asleep. But the mere cessation of our rising as ego is useless if it's only temporary. That's why Bhagavan says in verse 13 of Upadesha Undiyā, Ilayamum nasamum irendumam odukam. Ilayatu uļḷadu erum undipara. Eradu uru mindadel undipara. What that means is that dissolution, that means dissolution of mind, is of two kinds, laya and nasa. What is What is subsided in layer will rise. If its form dies, it will not rise. So Bhagavan is here distinguishing two types of dissolution of mind. Any state of dissolution from which the mind rises again is only laya. That is, sleep is laya. Kevala Nirvikalpa Samadhi is laya. Coma is laya. General anesthesia is laya. Death also may be laya for a short while, but our aim is not laya, because laya is temporary. If we're in laya, we'll certainly rise again. So the dissolution of mind that we are seeking is the permanent dissolution, the mano-nāsa. So it is the destruction of ego. Only in true safety lies only in the destruction of ego. Because if we subside merely in manolaya, if we, like the yogi, Bhagavan told the story of it, like that yogi, if we remain 300 years in samadhi, what is the use of that? When we wake up, the first thing we think about is the water that we were asking for 300 years earlier, like as that yogi did. So mere manolaya is useless. What we are seeking is mano-nāsa. Mano-nāsa means the complete eradication of ego. So that is what Bhagavan is talking about in this verse. By taking refuge at his feet, what do we achieve? We achieve death, the death of ego. And then in the final verse, sentence of this verse, he says, sārvu enam, the thought of death, sārvarō, davar. That is, will the thought of death, will those who are deathless be associated with the thought of death? That is, we begin with intense fear of death. That intense fear of death drives our mind inwards to take refuge at the feet of the maraṇabhava-millā mahēśaṉ, who is always shining in our heart as I. When we take refuge in his feet, we thereby achieve the death of ego. Having achieved the death of ego, we become deathless. So will we ever again have the thought of death? That is, the way to get rid of the thought of death is to die. But not just to die as we have died so many crores of times before. The death of the body, it needs to be the permanent death, the real death. That is, the death of body is at best manolaya. But the death we are seeking is the death of ego, the death of mind, the mano-nāsa. So we can achieve that only by looking deep within, by penetrating deep into the heart, with our heart melting with love. Parivalulamuruha, with our whole heart melting with love, we need to go within and reach the cave of our heart, the very center of our heart, where that maraṇabhava-millā mahēśaṉ is always shining as I am. When we reach the heart, finished, he will kill us, and we thereby become deathless, and thereby the thought of death will never again touch us. No thought of any kind will touch us. That is moksha. That is freedom from samsara. That is the only true refuge, the only fortress from which we can escape samsara is in the depth of our own heart. So we can die as ego only by being in the heart as it is. Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. That is what Bhagavan teachings are all about. That is what Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is all about. That is what the entire Vedanta is all about. Aham said to Aham, I'll just read it again. It's so beautifully said there. That is Akila Vedanta Siddhanta Sārvartañ. Aham Unmayaha Urevan. I will say what is there. I will truly tell what is the essence of all of the final conclusion of all of Vedanta. I dying, if I becomes that I, which is awareness, alone will remain. So that is what Bhagavan's teachings are all about. That is what Vedanta is all about. That is what Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is all about. That is what this verse is all about. Turning within and thereby taking refuge at his feet, thereby dying. That is our aim. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramana.
Thank you, Michael. So, elsewhere, I remember reading in one of your articles that Anya Bhava and Ananya Bhava, Anya Bhakti and Ananya Bhakti are mutually complementary. Could you explain that further, please? And how practically we can use Anya Bhakti in the pursuit of Ananya Bhakti?
So long as we look outwards, we are a person. We experience ourselves as I am this body. That is, there are two defining characteristics of ego. One is, as ego, we are always aware of ourselves as I am this body. And we are consequently aware of other things. This body is a form. Because we experience ourselves as a form means something that is separate from other things. So everything else seems to be a form. As Bhagavan says in the fourth verse of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, Uruvam Tānayin, Uluhu Paramatran. If oneself is a form, world and God will be forms. So when we rise as ego, we assume a form. We limit ourselves as a form. And as this form, this little person, Michael, cannot be God. So I am very small. God is so big. He's the eternal, infinite reality. So how can this little person, Michael, be God? So God seems to be something other than ourselves. That's why Bhagavan said, even God becomes a form when we rise as a form. When we take ourselves, rise as ego and take ourselves to be a form, God seems to be form. So long as we experience ourselves as a form, we cannot know God as formless. So inevitably, when our attention is going outwards, Bhagavan seems to be something other than ourselves. We don't go around saying, I am Bhagavan. But obviously, the I that says, but wants to say, I am Brahman, I am Shivoham, or I am Bhagavan, or whatever, that I is ego. What is the state where we truly experience ourselves as that? As Bhagavan says in verse 27, Nāno diāda ulla-nilai, nāmaduvai ulla-nilai. So the oneness of ourself and God can be experienced only in the state in which we do not rise as I. So long as we rise as I, we limit ourselves as a form of a body. We see so many other things. And so God also appears to be something other than ourselves. So long as our attention is going outwards, it is appropriate to worship God as a form, to worship God in the form of our natural, to worship God in the form of Bhagavan. That is appropriate, so long as our attention is going outwards. But we should understand that is not the most perfect form of bhakti. Anya bhavatin avanaha mahum ananya bhavame undipara anaitimanum utama undipara. So the real bhakti, the highest bhakti, the greatest bhakti is not to worship him as Anya, as something other than ourselves. It is to worship him as Ananya, as not other than ourselves. How can we worship him as not other than ourselves? First, we need to recognize aham avam ahum. He is I. He is that which is shining in our heart as I. And we need to attend only to I, not to anything other than ourselves. Ananya Bhava means meditating on what is not other. What is not other than ourselves is only ourselves. So meditating on ourselves alone. In other words, what Bhagavan otherwise described as Atma-vichara, that is the greatest of all bhaktis. And he makes it even more clear in the next verse. Bhava balatinal, by the strength of that Ananya Bhava, by the strength of that self-attentiveness, Bhava balatina bhavanatita sabhava tirutale undipara, being in our real being, which is or in a state of being which is beyond bhavana. Beyond the bhavana in this context means the meditation as a mental activity, meditating on God as something other than ourselves. So by the strength of that self-attentiveness, we sink into the heart and we remain as just Sat-Bhava, as just that real being, that state of being, I am. And that, Bhagavan says, is Parabhakti Tattva. That is the principle or the essence or the essence, the true spirit, that is the tattva of supreme devotion. So the greatest devotion is the Ananya Bhakti. When our minds are coming outwards, we can't say I and God are one, because but when our minds are coming outwards, there seems to be so much otherness. So long as we're aware of anything other than ourselves, we are not the infinite whole. So if we think I am God, we are limiting God to this small person we take ourselves to be. So Anya Bhava is inevitable so long as we look outwards. But when we are not, when we don't experience enough love to turn within, then we should have love for araṇ-āha. We should have love for Bhagavan in name and form. That is appropriate. Ninaya nuruvena veniye nanna. When I approach you as having form, you stand as a hill on earth. But if and trying to meditate on your form as formless, it's useless. Bhagavan says in that verse. Why is it? Bhagavan says, trying to meditate on your form as formless is like running around the world trying to see the sky. That is, what is the sky? It's nothing but space. But it seems to us sky is something far away. It's a big blue canopy. So how are we to reach it? If we can't fly, we have to run to the horizon because the sky is touching the horizon. But when we get to the horizon, it's gone to the next horizon. It's gone. Well, we can never see the sky so long as we take it to be something other than ourselves. So long as we are trying to meditate on God as formless, so long as we experience ourselves as a form, we cannot know formlessness. Even the idea that God is formless is just that. It's an idea, and ideas are all just forms. So we cannot meditate on God as formless without experiencing ourselves as formless. That is why Bhagavan says in the first maṅgalam verse, how to meditate on that formless Uḷḷadu. Only by being in the heart as it is. That is the only way of true formless meditation is just being as it is. So long as our attention is coming outwards, it's appropriate to worship him in name and form. Why do we worship the name and form of araṇ-āha and of Bhagavan? Because they have that special power to turn our mind back within. So what do we pray to araṇ-āha for? Only to turn our mind within. That is what Bhagavan, the whole of Aksharamlaya, the whole of araṇ-āha Stuti Pancham, all of the prayers there are just different ways of praying for making the mind turn within and seeking its own annihilation and surrendering itself completely and thereby embracing its own annihilation. Is that an adequate answer?
Yeah.
Adequately clear answer?
Yes, thank you, Michael. And then Swami somewhere say that Arunachala Ramana is the only third-person object that turns your mind inwards.
Yes. Bhagavan says in the 9th verse of araṇ-āha Patikam, Patanam Pudumai, Vivalikanta, this magnetic hill. I've seen a wonder. This magnetic hill forcibly attracts the soul, who forcibly attracts the soul. Patanam Pudumai, this magnetic hill, but when thought of once, stills the cheste, the mischievous activity of the mind, and draws it tanadu abhimukamaha, making it facing itself. In other words, turning the mind back within, it feeds upon that ripe soul, as it takes it as bali, that is the sacrificial offering. So by meditating, by thinking of araṇ-āha, he has that power to turn our attention within, to draw our attention within, to face him as he really is, namely as I am, and thereby he feeds on us. So everywhere Bhagavan's message is the same. Be very careful. Don't take araṇ-āha as your God unless you're ready to embrace your own destruction. Don't take Bhagavan as your God unless you're ready to embrace your own destruction. Because that is the whole purpose of the appearance of araṇ-āha before Brahma and Vishnu, was to crush their ego. The appearance of Bhagavan in our life is to crush our ego. So unless we are willing to have our egos crushed, if we're not willing, then run far away from Bhagavan, because he's very dangerous. But once we've been caught by him, even if we want to run away, we can't run away, because he is that magnetic hill. Once we've been caught within the orbit of the magnet, there is no escaping. Once we've been caught within the glance of Guru's grace, Avaral Rakshika Padavare Andri Orukalam Kaivida Pada. He will certainly save us and never forsake us. This is what Bhagavan says in the 12th paragraph of ṇāha. Eninum Guru Katya Varipadi Tavaraja Nadika Vendum. Nevertheless, it's necessary to follow unfailingly the path shown by Guru. That is, he's now caught us in his the web of his grace, but we have to play our part. We have to surrender ourselves to him. How do we surrender ourselves to him? By turning our attention back within.
And any other adjunct instructions he gives to get to that end, right? Like
the whole of his teachings is pointing only at that.
No, I'm talking about the adjuncts, like in Nāṇyar, he says like mita-sattvika ahara niyama and aids,
yes,
like that.
These are all, these are very ordinary things. I mean, it's necessary. Of course, we should take mita-sattvika ahara niyama. If the mind is not in a sattvic condition, Bhagavan says, I think in Vichara Sangraham, he says, if the mind is overcome by tamas and you try to know what you are, it's like taking a blunt crowbar, a blunt iron bar, and trying to separate the fine threads of a silk cloth. You may become managed, but it's very, very difficult with a blunt crowbar. It's much easier with a small little fine needle, then you can do so easily. Likewise, if the mind is under the sway of rajas, it's like trying to find a small object that has fallen in the grass on the ground in the light of a flickering lamp. You may be able to find it, but it's very, very difficult. It's much easier in a steady light to find what is there. So the mind must be sharp, devoid of tamas, and it must be very sattvic. It must be in a state of... Sattva means what? Beingness. Sat is being. Sattva is beingness. So sattva is the quality of beingness. So it's only by being in the heart as it is, being as we actually are, but we can know ourselves as we actually are. So the sattvic state of mind is, of course, necessary. And whatever will aid a sattvic state of mind is, of course, beneficial. And taking sattvic ahara, mita-sattvika ahara. And ahara doesn't only mean the food we consume through our mouth, but ahara means what is taken in. So it's not only the food we take in through our mouth, it's all that we take in through our five senses. If we are constantly watching violent movies or following the news with great excitement or everything, our mind will not be in a sattvic condition. We need to, as far as possible, withdraw our mind from the world, lose interest in the world. Then only the mind will be in the sattvic condition that is required to turn within. So yes, Bhagavan did occasionally point out some supplementary things, but by and large, Bhagavan pointed at one thing alone is necessary. Oruvam tan sarupamadeyam varayil, tan nirantara swarupa smaranai kai patruvanayin adu andre podam. That is, if one until one attains Swarupa, if one clings firmly to unceasing, perpetual self-remembrance, that alone is sufficient. So if we take to this path of self-investigation, if we try to turn our attention within more and more and more, everything else will fall into place. If we are following this path, we will have no inclination to eat non-sattvic food. In Gita, when Krishna talks about, Krishna doesn't say what is sattvic food, what is tamasic, what is rajasic food, what is tamasic food. What he says in Gita is, whatever foods that will appeal to the sattvic natured mind, whatever foods that will appeal to the rajasic natured mind, whatever foods that will appeal to the tamasic natured mind. So if we have a sattvic mind, we will automatically be inclined to eat only sattvic food. And we'll also be inclined only to take in sattvic things through our five senses.
Right.
So all these supplementary things, they're all necessary, but it's not necessary to emphasize them, because if we're attracted to this path, we will automatically feel averse to for example, eating non-vegetarian food, eating meat or anything like that. We'll be averse to taking intoxicating drink or drugs or anything else that is not sattvic.
Thank you, Michael. There is a question from one of the devotees. You mentioned about liberation with form, and there's liberation with or without form. When you're trying to quote the different philosophies out there.
Yes.
So one of the devotees is asking, what is liberation with form and liberation with or without form? So you better be careful what you mention.
Well, that is Indian philosophy and Indian religions. There are innumerable variations on different themes. So both within Hinduism and Buddhism, there are people who think that going to some sort of heavenly world. There's a form of Buddhism called Pure Land Buddhism. They believe there's a world where the Buddha lives, and if you go to that pure land, that is liberation for them. For the Vaishnavites, going to Vaikuntha is liberation. For the Krishna Bhaktas, being ever in Gokula, being with Krishna in Krishna's abode, that is liberation. For the staunch Shaivites, going to Kailasa, that is liberation. So there are so many different concepts people have. For Christians, going to heaven and being with God, that is salvation. For the Muslims, something similar. So everyone had their own idea of what is salvation. But most ideas that people have of salvation, all these, we're retaining our individuality. So long as we're retaining our individuality, that means we have a form. Because individuality means a separate existence. We can't have a separate existence without having a form. So that is what is called all those numerous different, they're all different variations on the different theme. That is the Christian concept of heaven, the Islamic concept of paradise, the Vaishnavite concept of Vaikuntha. All these are, the details may differ, but in essence, they're all talking about the same thing. They've all got a similar concept of what is salvation or what is liberation. Some people think, but when you have attained liberation, you've got great power. So you can be with form if you want to be, you can be without form. So you can take on individuality and you can merge back into Brahman. And whenever you want to come out, you come out again. So different ideas people have according to, these appeal to people of different types of different levels of maturity. But we need not be concerned with any of these, because Bhagavan has given the final verdict: death of ego, that alone is liberation. So investigating all these other forms of liberation is what Bhagavan referred to in ṇāha as investigating all the tattvas that conceal ourselves, all the tattvas that are not ourselves. Investigating them is useless. It's like in a barber shop, instead of sweeping up and throwing away all the hair at the end of the day, if you begin to analyze how many gray hairs are there, how many black hairs, how many red hairs, how many blonde hairs, how many curly hairs, how many straight hairs, how many long hairs, how many short hairs, if you begin to analyze that, it's useless. It's all rubbish. It's to be thrown away. So all these different conceptions, but different religions have of liberation need not concern us. Once we understand liberation is death of ego, that's we need be no more concerned with anything, with all these different types of religion when we're concerned about nuclear physics or quantum mechanics or politics or all these things. All these are so long as we look outward, there's any number of variety of things we can know about. But as Bhagavan says in Ātma-vidde, without knowing oneself, what is the use of knowing everything else? And if you know yourself, what else is there to know? So Bhagavan's aim is just that the aim of Bhagavan's teaching, we should know and be what we actually are. When we know and be what we actually are, that is death of ego. And then there's nothing else to know because everything else exists only in the view of ego.
Thank you, Michael. Sandy is asking, is turning mind inwards mean keep asking, who am I?
Well, I'll answer that in two parts. Firstly, Bhagavan never asked us to ask, who am I? Bhagavan asked us to investigate, who am I? It's a big difference. Supposing Bhagavan gives you a book and says, investigate what's written in the book. If you sit there holding the book in your hand, close your eyes, what is written in this book? What is written in this book? You're never going to know what's written in the book. If you want to know what's written in this book, what do you have to do? You have to open it and read it, see it. So when Bhagavan says, investigate who am I, he doesn't mean ask who am I. He means look within yourself and see what you actually are. So Bhagavan's teachings are, but we should investigate who am I, not that we should ask who am I. Regarding turning within, Bhagavan often described this practice as turning within. But we need to understand when the term inside and outside are obviously relative terms. So in things that may be outside from one perspective, may be inside from another perspective, and vice versa. So in some contexts, Bhagavan talks about the world outside and the world inside. The world outside means for instance, in verse 6 of araṇ-āha, when describing how the world is created as mental projection, he says it appears as a world inside and outside. So what does inside and outside mean in that context? Outside means what is outside the body. The physical world is the world outside. The inside, the mind, the world of mental objects, thoughts, feelings, perceptions, memories, all these, this is the inside world. So that's one sense in which inside and outside can be used. But when in the context of self-investigation, what Bhagavan means by inside is not inside the body, not inside the mind, inside ourselves. What is inside ourselves is only ourselves. Everything other than ourselves is outside. All our thoughts, feelings, memories, perceptions, everything, it's all anya, it's all alien to us, it's all something other than ourselves. So it's all that is outside. What is inside is what exists and shines throughout all the three states. What exists in sleep and what exists and shines in sleep is only I am. So that alone is inside. So when Bhagavan talks about turning within, he means turning our attention back towards ourselves, looking at ourselves, attending to ourselves. That is what is meant by turning within. It's not because in yoga and things, they may think that I'm meditating on a flame in my heart. That flame in the heart is just a concept, an idea. So that is, from the perspective of self-investigation, that is outside. That flame is outside. It's something anya to us. So the inside and outside, we need to understand from the context in what sense it's used. So in this context, when Bhagavan talks about turning within, he means turning towards I. In fact, a term that he often used, that is the usual Sanskrit terms, are bahya mukham and antamukham. Bahya mukham means facing outside. Bahya means outside, and mukham means facing. The opposite of bahya mukham is antamukham, looking inside. Bhagavan used another synonym for antamukham in Tamil, that is ahamukham. That is a Tamil term. Mukham is a Sanskrit term, but aham is it's a nice Tamil term, because in Tamil, aham has two meanings. That is, there's a pure Tamil word, aham, which means heart or home, or basically it means inside. What is inside? So heart or home, or the exact meaning of aham varies according to context. People often call their home aham. Right? Sri Ramana aham would mean the home of Ramana. If you, in Tamil Nadu, there's Unabaham. That is, the restaurants are called Unabaham. It's a home of food. So aham has different meanings in different contexts, but that's a pure Tamil word, aham. In the context of Bhagavan's teaching, aham means the heart, inside. And there's also the Sanskrit pronoun aham, which is a different word. It's from the Sanskrit, but it's also used in Tamil and spelled exactly the same and pronounced the same, aham. So when Bhagavan talks about ahamukham, Bhagavan often used the word aham with a double meaning, because it's got its Tamil meaning and its Sanskrit meaning, and they're very, very close in meaning, because where is I? I is inside. And what is inside? Only I. So they're very close. These two words, that are spelt the same and pronounced the same, are very closely related. So Bhagavan spoke of ahamukham. So we can take ahamukham to have two meanings. It means facing inside. It also means facing I. So that's why Bhagavan very much often used that term, ahamukham, in Arunachal Pancharatnam. Ahamukhama and amalamati tanna. That is the mind facing inwards or facing eyewards.
Thank you, Michael.
In another place, aha no kal, in I think Dipadashana Tattvam, Bhagavan says, Ittanuve nanam enumatiye nitap buddhi ideyate parandeha no kal, aha no kal. He said, by looking, noku means looking, aha means inside or eye. So aha no kal can mean looking inside or looking at eye. Whichever way you interpret it, it means the same. It means looking only, facing ourselves.
Right. As a continuation of that, Rabi is asking a question. The yogi, the example that you quoted during the discussion, the yogi who was in samadhi for 300 years, was also not attending to the outside world. Why then did it not result in mano-nasa due to absence of thought?
For exactly the same reason, but falling asleep doesn't result in mano-nasa. When we fall asleep, what happens? We withdraw our attention from the outside world, but we don't focus it on ourselves. We merely withdraw it from the outside world, so we subside in mano-laya. Any state of dissolution of mind that is brought about by any means other than self-attentiveness is only mano-laya, because only self-attentiveness can destroy the mind. Why is that? Because ego, what is ego? Ego is a false awareness of ourselves. Ego is the false awareness, I am this body. So how can we get rid of this false awareness? We can get rid of it only by the correct awareness. That is the false awareness, I am this body. That is avidya. How to get rid of avidya? Only by vidya. The vidya is the awareness of ourselves as we actually are. So how to be aware of ourselves as we actually are? We need to look at ourselves. If you don't look at, if you want to see the sun, you need to turn and look at it. If you just say, okay, I want to see the sun, so I won't look at anything else, I'll close my eyes, you can't see the sun. So what the yogis are doing, metaphorically, they're closing their eyes. They are shutting out awareness of all other things. By pranayama and other things, they're withdrawing their attention from all other things. But it results only in manolaya, not manonasa. As Bhagavan says, at the end of the 8th paragraph, therefore pranayama is only an aid to restrain the mind and will not bring about manonasa. He says explicitly there. So by merely withdrawing our attention from other things, we cannot, that is not the means to bring about manonasa. That's a means to bring about manolaya, but not manonasa. In order to achieve manonasa, ego needs to see itself as it actually is. But ego can never see itself as it actually is because ego is a false awareness. So if we turn within to see what we actually are, as soon as we see ourselves as pure awareness, we will thereby cease to be ego. So ego is destroyed only by seeing itself as it actually is. Because as soon as it sees itself as it actually is, it's no longer ego. It is only what it actually is. What can know pure awareness? Only pure awareness. Pure awareness can never be an object of awareness. So the ego can know itself as it actually is. That is, but by knowing itself as it actually is, ego thereby dies. So manonasa can be achieved only by self-investigation, not by any other means whatsoever. So there are so many means of achieving manolaya. We achieve manolaya every day when we fall asleep because we're just too tired to continue thinking. We withdraw our attention from other things because we don't have the energy to continue projecting this world and seeing it. So we subside back into sleep. Manolaya is achieved if you take a anesthetic drug. You achieve manolaya. If you take various other types of drugs, if you drink too much alcohol, you achieve manolaya. You fall asleep. If you have a car accident and get a bang on the head, you end up in coma. That's manolaya. When the body dies, one of two things can happen. Either we go into a state like sleep, a temporary state of manolaya, or we immediately begin dreaming another dream. It doesn't matter. I mean, it's still, if we don't immediately start dreaming some other dream, then we fall in manolaya. So the yogis, what they are achieving, what they call Kevala Nirvikalpa Samadhi, is just manolaya. And manolaya is just a suspension of everything. You don't make any spiritual progress. We don't make spiritual progress in sleep. Likewise, we don't make spiritual progress in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. That's why Bhagavan used to tell this story. What Bhagavan said is, when that yogi woke up from Nirvikalpa Samadhi the first time, he was feeling thirsty. So he asked his disciple to fetch water from a Ganga. But before his disciple had time to fetch the water, he again went into Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And that time he was absorbed in Nirvikalpa Samadhi so deeply, he didn't wake up for 300 years. That's the whole body goes into if you go deep into Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the body goes into a state of almost suspended animation. There may be just one heartbeat, one or two heartbeats a minute, only a slight breathing. It's all everything is in a state of subsidence. That's why the body can live for even 300 years. So when he woke up after 300 years, his disciple, poor fellow, had passed away a few hundred years earlier. The nearby village was no longer there because the river had changed its course. The course of the Ganga had changed. It was a few miles away. So where he was sitting had become a big jungle. The trees had grown up around him. But the first thought that rose in his mind is, he angrily asked, "Where's my water?" So Bhagavan said, even the most superficial thought in his mind, the last thought that was in his mind when he went into Nirvikalpa Samadhi, was the first thought that rose when he woke up. That means not even the most superficial thought is eradicated, in spite of being 300 years in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. The reason is, and so Bhagavan said, when even that most superficial thought is not eradicated, what to say about all the crores of vasanas that are in the heart? They are not annihilated. Vasanas are not annihilated in manolaya. The reason being, what are vasanas? The vasanas are ego's inclinations. How vasanas grow strong? Vasanas have no strength of their own. Vasanas, whatever strength vasanas seem to have, is the strength we give them. And how do we give vasanas strength? By allowing ourselves to be swayed by them. So when we allow ourselves to be swayed by, the more we allow ourselves to be swayed by any particular type of vasana, that vasana will grow strong. So the more we allow ourselves to be swayed by Vishaya vasanas, the stronger our Vishaya vasanas have become. This is wherein lies the efficacy of self-investigation. By turning our attention back within, we are being swayed by what vasana? Only by the sat vasana. So the sat vasana is strengthened, and we are not allowing ourselves to be swayed by any Vishaya vasana. So they are weakened. So vasanas are strengthened to the extent we allow ourselves to be swayed by them, and they are weakened to the extent we don't allow ourselves to be swayed by them. In manolaya, there is neither ego nor vasanas, because obviously there's no ego in manolaya. Therefore, there's no vasanas, because vasanas can't exist without ego, because whose vasanas are they? They're ego's vasanas. So it's only in the waking and dream state that we can make spiritual progress. We can try and turn our attention within, and thereby weaken the Vishaya vasanas. The more we turn within, the weaker the Vishaya vasanas become, the stronger the sat vasana becomes. That is what is called purification of mind. The achievement of bhakti, which is the sat vasana, and the vairagya, which is the weakening of the Vishaya vasanas. And only by bhakti and vairagya can we know what we actually are. Vairagya, as Bhagavan said, that is the stone we must tie to our waist in order to dive deep within. And when he talks about bhakti, when he talks about vairagya, bhakti is implied, because bhakti and vairagya always go hand in hand. To the extent to which we have love to turn within, we are free of desire to go outwards.
Two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
Nalini asked question, is what we perceive as the seer, even when the mind is quiescent, actually the ego mind?
Yes, that which is aware of anything other than itself is ego. So when we say the mind is quiescent, either we're talking about manolaya, which we're not, because generally when we're meditating, we don't completely go into a sleep-like state. It is just a relative quiescence of mind. But it's not, people say, I was 20 minutes in meditation, I didn't think any thought. The I that was 20 minutes in meditation and didn't think any thought is itself a thought. It's the first thought it's ego. So yes, that which is aware of anything other than itself is ego.
Thank you, Michael.
And the ego, we never actually see ego. We seem to be ego because we're looking at other things. But if we look at ourselves, has anyone ever seen ego? That's why Bhagavan used to say, when people say, Bhagavan, how did ego come into existence? Bhagavan said, first find ego and bring it to me. Then we can find out how it comes into existence. If we look for it, Tedinal autem pidicum. If sought, it takes flight. We can never find ego, because ego is it has no reality at all. We seem to be ego only so long as we're looking away from ourselves. When we look back at ourselves, all that we see is pure awareness. If you don't look at the snake carefully enough, it looks like it's a snake. If you look at it carefully enough, what do you see? Oh, it's only a rope.
Right.
So ego, some people who don't have a deep practical understanding, some Vedantins, I've heard some Vedantins saying, ego also is an object. Ego can never be an object. Ego is not an object. Ego identifies itself as objects. That is, the 5 sheaths that we take to be I are objects. But ego can never be an object. Ego is always the subject. But the subject can never become an object. In whose view then does ego seem to exist? Only in the view of ego. But ego seems to be ego, in the view of ego, only when ego is looking at other things. When we're not looking at other things, ego subsides and dissolves back in its source. That's why Bhagavan says, Tedinalotam pidikam.
Right. There is a comment here. Namaskara, Michael. Destruction doesn't seem that easy. Still, identifying oneself as a woman or a man and the features of that body, education, positions, family, background, none of them seem to leave the ego till someone falls asleep. Even in dream, we dream as this person.
Yes. Why the destruction seems to be not easy, according to Bhagavan, this is extremely easy. There's no path, there's nothing easier than knowing ourselves, than knowing and being ourselves, because we always know and are ourselves. It seems difficult because we have so much liking for other things. We are more interested in knowing things other than ourselves than in knowing ourselves. If we were as interested in knowing ourselves as we are in knowing all these other things, then knowing ourselves will be very easy. But we're more interested in knowing what is the situation in the pandemic, what is going to, am I going to get a promotion in my job? Am I going to get a pay rise? How am I going to pay my bills? We're more interested in knowing all about what is in the news today. What is happening in Ukraine? Is Putin going to attack? What is the politics? So many things interest us. What are the sports results? Had my team won or have they not won? We're interested in so many things. We're interested in philosophy. We're interested in history. We're interested in religion. We're interested in science. We're interested in so many things. But one thing we are not interested in is knowing who am I. So knowing who am I seems to be very difficult because so long as we are interested in anything other than ourselves, it will seem to be very difficult to know ourselves because we cannot know ourselves without giving up all knowledge of everything else. That is, we can't know ourselves and know anything else because what actually exists is only ourselves. When we know ourselves as we actually are, we'll know there's nothing else to know. That's why Bhagavan says in Anma-Vidyā, I referred to it earlier, that's in the third verse of Anma-Vidyā. Tanne aridal indri, pinne edu arihil en. That means without knowing oneself, if one knows whatever else, what? That means so what? What benefit is there in knowing anything other than ourselves when we don't know ourselves? And then he says, Tane arindidil pin aria enne uڵḷadu. If one has known oneself, then what exists to know? That is, if we know ourselves as we actually are, there's nothing else to know. So long as we have a liking to know anything other than ourselves, that liking to know other things is what obstructs us from knowing ourselves. So that's why Bhagavan often said, Bhakti is the mother of jnana. We must have all-consuming love for this. This is why in Ariyati Tarajivara, in that verse, in the third line, when he begins to say, how can we know this Arunachal Ramana? Parival ulam uruha, heart melting with love. We have to have all-consuming love, heart-melting love. Then only we can know what we actually are. So it's not difficult. It may seem difficult, but it seems difficult only because of our lack of love. Okay. Love is the key. Bhakti is the mother of jnana. Right. Have I answered the question?
Yes.
Was there something more to it?
No, I think
by giving my...
I think you answered it because love is the key. I mean, the love to attend to ourselves. That is what is going to make it easy rather than difficult.
Yeah, but I've forgotten exactly the wording of the question.
Yeah, she started with basically the person stressed on the difficulty of it. And then you answered.
It seems difficult because we don't want to. It's very difficult to. If you, supposing you're in a plane and you're asked to jump out, a parachute out of a plane. If you don't want the parachute, it seems very difficult. We have to let go of everything and jump back into the heart.
Right.
That we have to parachute into the heart. So long as we're afraid of heights, we're not going to jump out of a plane.
Right. You got to just trust the process.
Yes. Supposing my parachute doesn't open, what's going to happen to me? We think so many things. If we let go of everything else and jump back inside, we will find, as Bhagavan said, we are already standing on solid ground. Bhagavan sometimes gave an analogy of there was a man who was standing on the ground holding the branch of a tree and saying, I'm bound to this tree, I'm bound to this tree. And some passersby came and said, you're not bound to a tree, you're holding on to the tree. Why do you say you're bound? Of course I'm bound to a tree. If I let go, then I'll fall. And they said, no, you're standing on solid ground. Like that, we're afraid to let go of everything else because what will happen to us? We're afraid. But actually, we are already what we actually are. So there's nothing to lose.
Right.
By giving up everything, we lose nothing and we gain everything. We gain the only thing there is. That is, I am, which is already ours.
Exactly.
So we lose what we... there's a saying in Sanskrit, I can't remember exactly, that is, generally it is said, the goal of Vedanta is sukha prapti, achieving happiness, and dukkha nivritti, removing misery. So there's another saying, I can't remember exactly how it is, you're achieving what is already achieved, and you're losing what you never had.
Right. Satya Chilukuri is asking, can we consider manolaya as a step forward towards manonasa?
No. Do you make any progress towards manonasa by falling asleep? There's no difference between one state of manonasa, one state of manolaya and another. The only difference, why we have different names for different states of manolaya, if you go into manolaya because of tiredness, it's called sleep. If you go into manolaya because of anesthesia, it's called an anesthetic coma. If you go into manolaya because of bang on the head, it's called coma. If you go into manolaya by means of pranayama and other yogic practices, it's called nirvikalpa samadhi. But manolaya means dissolution of mind. When mind is dissolved, there's no differences. So this is why Bhagavan said, manolaya is of no use. However long you may remain in manolaya, in that same 8th paragraph, he says, so long as the prana remains subsided, the mind will also remain subsided. But when the prana emerges, mind will also emerge and wander under the sway of its vasanas. So the vasanas, as soon as ego rises, it rises with all its vasanas. So vasanas are not destroyed in manolaya. This is why metaphorically it is said, generally in a lot of texts they say, what remains in sleep? Only the karana sarira. The karana sarira, or anantamaya kosha, is the totality of all the vasanas. So they say the vasanas, the seeds, the vasanas of the seeds, they remain in sleep. That's a convenient explanation to give to people, but that's not actually the truth, because as Bhagavan said, the vasanas are whose vasanas? They're ego's vasanas. In sleep, there's no ego, and therefore there are no vasanas. But when ego subsides into laya, it subsides along with all its vasanas. When it emerges with all its vasanas. So we don't eradicate even the smallest vasana is not eradicated, no matter, even if you remain for 300 years in laya. So laya is of no use. Bhagavan never encouraged. Obviously, we need to sleep because we can't carry on without sleeping. But Bhagavan never encouraged people to practice pranayama to the point of going into nirvikalpa samadhi. That's why in verse 13, he makes that important distinction between manolaya and manonasa. What is in manolaya will rise again. What is in manolaya Mano-nāsa will not rise again. Then in the next verse, he says, the mind, odaka-valiye odungamulate, mind which will subside by restraining the breath, vidakave ovari undipara, biyamadun uru undipara. What that means is, only when one sends the mind, which in this context we can take it, which becomes calm when one restrains the breath, on the investigating path. Or means investigating, vari means path. On the investigating path, will its form perish? In other words, we can attain mano-nāsa only by self-investigation. That's the implication of this verse. What Bhagavan explained is, that the meaning that Bhagavan intended here, when if we're inclined, practicing pranayama is not necessary, but for those who are inclined to practice pranayama, Bhagavan said it's okay to practice it up to a certain point to achieve a certain calmness of mind, but then you have to use that calmness of mind to direct your attention back within. You shouldn't go further and allow it to dissolve completely in layer, because once you've dissolved it completely in layer, you come to a standstill. You can't make any progress in layer. You had to then wait 5 minutes or 5 hours or 300 years, however long it may be. Only when you wake up again can you begin your practice. So the practice that is required is not merely bringing about the dissolution of mind. It is turning the attention within. That is the only way to bring about the permanent dissolution of mind. Otherwise, any dissolution brought about by any means other than self-investigation is only a temporary dissolution.
Right. Thank you, Michael. Srini Kopula is asking, turning our attention inwards, does it mean not attending to any thoughts in our mind and being in silence? It
entails that, but it doesn't mean that. Turning our mind within means attending only to ourselves. When you attend only to yourself, you thereby cease attending to anything else. So that's why Bhagavan says in verse 16 of Upadeshundya, Velividengale Vittu, giving up external object. That means ceasing to attend to anything other than yourself. Manam tan oli uru ordale undipara, unme unicham undipara. That is, it is necessary to give up attending to anything else, but it is not sufficient. Because we give up attending to anything else every day when we fall asleep, but we thereby achieve just mano-laya. So that's why that velividengale vittu, that is an adverbial clause. The main clause is, or the subject of the sentence is, manam tan oli uru ordale, the mind knowing its own form of light. So it's only that mind knowing its own form of light means, or ordale can mean knowing, it can also mean investigating. So the mind attending to itself, the mind investigating itself, the mind knowing itself, knowing its form of light means, it's a light there means awareness. In Sanskrit he says, chittam atmanaha chitva darshanam, the mind seeing its own chitva, its own consciousness. That is tattva darshanam. That is seeing the reality. In Tamil, he says, manam thanoli uru ordale. The mind knowing or investigating or knowing its own form of light, that is ummeyunachi. That is the real awareness. So being aware of anything other than ourselves is not real awareness. It's only a semblance of awareness. It's chittabhasa. Chittabhasa means a semblance of awareness, because nothing other than ourself exists. So being aware of something that doesn't exist cannot be real awareness. Real awareness is being aware only of what actually exists. What actually exists is only pure awareness. So the mind knowing its own form of light, that alone is unmeyunachi. An important thing in this verse 16, why does Bhagavan say the mind knowing its own form of light? How can the mind know pure awareness? Obviously, the mind cannot know pure awareness, but the mind needs to know pure awareness, because only when it knows pure awareness does it cease to be mind and does it remain as pure awareness. That's why he said the mind knowing its own pure awareness. So in sleep, what remains? In maraṇabhaya, what remains? In nirvikalpa samadhi, what remains? Only the pure awareness I am. But because the mind is not seeing that, it is only, the mind will rise again sooner or later. So the mind needs to see itself as pure awareness. Mind here means ego. Ego needs to see itself as pure awareness, because when it sees itself as pure awareness, it thereby ceases to be ego and remains as pure awareness, which is what it always actually is, or what we always actually are. So we, this ego, need to see ourselves as pure awareness. When we see ourselves as pure awareness, we are pure awareness. Tānai iritale, tānai aridalan. Being ourselves alone is knowing ourselves. We can't know ourselves without being ourselves. We can't know pure awareness without being pure awareness.
Okay. Rabbi Day is asking a question as sort of a sequel to the Manolaya related question earlier. If in the self-attention session, you lose awareness and experience quietness, is it Manolaya? If so, how to avoid falling in the trap of Manolaya?
What do you mean by losing awareness?
I think it's referring to going into, yeah.
We can never lose awareness, because the awareness I am is always shining. We are the awareness I
misspoke,
am.
Michael. Yeah.
Sorry?
I misspoke. What I meant was, getting into a trance-like quiet state.
Yes. If you merely withdraw your attention from other things without focusing your attention on yourself, that is Manolaya. But so that's why it's necessary to hold Swarupa Dhyanate Bida Pidiyai Pidikabendum, Bhagavan says in ṇāha. We have to tenaciously hold on to that self-attentiveness, that Swarupa Dhyana. If we don't hold on to that, that is, when we are practicing self-attentiveness, we are trying to remain balanced between thought and laya. This is why this path is sometimes described, in the Upanishads, it's described as the razor's edge, because it's a very fine balancing act. If we slip one way, our attention goes outwards after thoughts. If we slip the other way, we fall into Manolaya. We remain balanced between thought and Manolaya, between thought and sleep, by holding on to self-attentiveness. The self-attentiveness alone is the light, alone is the guide that will lead us beyond this duality of waking and sleep, of thought and thoughtlessness, of mind and Manolaya. We have to go beyond that. We can go beyond only by holding fast to what alone actually exists, namely I am.
So operationally, one should try to be vigilant and never get into the trance-like state.
We shouldn't try to avoid trance. We shouldn't try to avoid thought. We should just hold on to I am. If you hold on to I am, you will thereby avoid thought and thereby avoid the laya. But if you're trying to avoid thought or trying to avoid laya, your attention is on something other than yourself.
Okay.
So our only concern should be to hold on to I am.
So how do you know that you are in that state that leads to progression?
Are you not clearly aware I am?
Yeah, I am. Especially
hold on to that I am. Don't be concerned about anything else.
Okay.
Don't be concerned whether you're in this state or that state. Just hold on to I am. Don't think about anything else.
Okay.
But in his translation of verse 26, or in Bhagavad Gita chapter 6, verse 25, I think, Krishna says, Atma samstam manakritva na kinchitapi chintayat. That is, fix the mind in Atma. do not think at all of anything else. Bhagavan has very forcibly translated it in Tamil. Atma bil chittate anma bil satiruka. Fix the mind in yourself. There edeyum ittanayum enidade. Do not think even in the slightest of anything else. Yeah. So do not think about avoiding manalaya. Do not think about avoiding thought. Do not think about anything. Just hold on to self-attentiveness. That's all that is required. That is the only, that's all, that is both necessary and sufficient. Nothing else is required. And there's nothing else can be a substitute. That is, this alone is both necessary, it's sufficient, and it's necessary.
Right.
Because no other means is sufficient, and no other means is necessary.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And the last question from Renu: does manonasa mean being aware of awareness? The ego is the one that recognizes itself. But at this time of recognition, there is thoughtlessness. So this ego at that time is actually pure awareness that recognizes itself.
Yes. What does being aware of awareness mean? Awareness is always aware of awareness. Being aware of nothing other than ourselves, that is pure awareness. Being aware of anything other than ourselves, that is pure awareness, means awareness without any content, without any object, without any phenomena. So the pure awareness is just the awareness I am. Awareness of anything other than ourselves is impure awareness. So I am is always aware of itself as I am. So yes, awareness is always aware of awareness. Being aware of nothing other than awareness, that is pure awareness.
Right. Good. Thank you, Michael. I think most of the questions actually pertain, if you have properly understood verse 16 of Upadesa Undiyar, we wouldn't have all the questions that we were asking today.
If we properly understand any one teaching of Bhagavan, we wouldn't have any questions to ask. But in order to understand any one teaching, we need to view them all together, because we get deeper and deeper insight into any one teaching of Bhagavan by viewing it in the context of all the teachings. See, today I talked about this second maṅgalam verse, but in order to bring out the full meaning and implication, we had to compare with so many other teachings of Bhagavan. Because if we just take that verse on its own, it says actually the words themselves are saying relatively little. There's always in Bhagavan's verses or Bhagavan's words, there's always far more implication than the surface meaning. So we need to go deep into it to understand the implication. And we can understand the implication only by understanding each individual verse in the context of the entire work in which it's contained, and that entire work in the context of Bhagavan's entire teachings.
Yeah. Well, that's good. With that, I think we'll conclude today's session. It's almost 2 hours now. Thank you so much, Michael.
Right. Well, all thanks to Bhagavan.
Yes.
I get a bit carried away while talking, but in my enthusiasm.
Right. And a lot of thank you messages from our devotees on the post.
All thanks go to Bhagavan.
Right. And we'll see you next month when we'll be discussing verse 1 of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu.
Yes.
Michael, I just want to thank you so much today for your immense patience, explaining almost the same thing over and over so nicely. And I wanted to share with you, Michael, today's session, just, look at towards the end, looking at your eyes. Can you make some noise so that I can see you again?
Yes, I'm here. I've not disappeared yet. I should have done, but I'm not.
Yeah, the eyes. It was like, 100 years from now, we're not going to be, any of us is not going to be here, right? It's like I cease to exist completely.
That is the aim of all of Bhagavan's teaching. We cease to exist. That is our aim. Soon may that day come when we cease to exist and he alone remains as I.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All is only his. That is, if there's anything, I get carried away in my enthusiasm and everything, but ultimately, if there's anything of any use in anything I say, it's because it comes from him. It's not because of me. It's all coming from him because he alone is the source of all clarity. And how can we find that clarity? Only by looking in our heart. The more we look in our heart, the more we will lose ourselves in that infinite clarity that is Bhagavan. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramana Center.